There's something that nobody ever talks about in law enforcement. Law enforcement, we're number one. We're number one in alcoholism. We're number one in drug abuse. We're number one in heart disease. We're number one in suicide. Yeah. We're number one. And the reason for that is because you can only respond to the ugliest side of man for so long until the human mind becomes fatigued. Nobody's ever called the police to say, my daughter just graduated from kindergarten. We're cutting a cake. Why don't you call all your friends and the firefighters? And you know what? We got cupcakes and donuts for you guys. Our police department is number one in our city. That is our number one priority. And in the city of Sweetwater, our mantra, our city seal is God, country, family. So we have an amazing mayor who's been his entire career, who's been an advocate for law enforcement. As the president of the commission now, I'm a proud former Sweetwater policeman. I have the vice president of the commission, Jose Marti, that's his real name. He's not the poet. He's a retired fire captain, amazing individual who suffers from the same affliction and PTSD that we do. I have another commissioner, Idani Yanu, who her son is a trooper. I have another commissioner whose son is a fireman. And we have an amazing, amazing team.
Today we're going to talk about the transition from law enforcement to elected official. What are the lessons we learned? How are we impacted by the job? And how do we take our experiences into the next part of our life? I am Robert Asencio. And today on Bets and Badges, I have the honor and privilege of introducing and bringing back Marcos Villanueva, the president of the City of Sweetwater's City Council. Hi, Marcos. How are you?
What's up, my brother?
Hey, man. Good to see you. Man, it's been a little bit.
But yeah, it's been a minute since I was interviewed by you. I think the last time was just after COVID.
I've been wanting to invite you out to the show because you and I share, I think, a unique experience that not many people in South Florida have followed in the career path. We went from law enforcement to politics. And I wanted to bring you on to gain your perspective on leading a rapidly growing city that has a rather expansive police agency that now has had their share of big city events, big city incidents. And I wanted to talk to you about how you go about leading, how your experiences have impacted you in your current position, but more importantly, how has your life in law enforcement impacted you throughout these years?
I started in the city of Sweetwater in 1997 as a police dispatcher, and I always wanted to be a policeman. I was a police dispatcher on the midnight shift. Eventually, went to the police academy and became a reserve policeman with the city of Sweetwater. Coincidentally, I was hired with other agencies, but I refused to leave Sweetwater. So at the age of 9, I always knew I wanted to be a Sweetwater policeman. And they hired me as a part-time police officer, and then they hired me as a full-time police officer. I worked uniform patrol, midnight shift. I was bike patrol. I worked crime suppression team. I worked narcotics. I was a detective. I was part of the dive team. I trained with the canine unit. I was never canine. I trained with the SWAT team. I have SWAT missions. I never passed SWAT school. I want to make that abundantly clear. Mm-hmm. And I was a lot skinnier and a lot more athletic back then than I am now. And I was able to attain to be number 4 in the agency. There's a lot of trauma responses that come out now. During your career, every call you go on, every scene you're on, every time you see a child that has died, every time you see a fatality crash, every time you see a husband who's murdered his wife or a wife who's murdered his husband. It's funny because during those scenes, they never really affect me unless they were children. One of the hardest things that we've ever had to do in law enforcement, and you've had to do it, is death notifications. When you show up at a family's house at 3 o'clock in the morning. And right after that trauma response, you got to go back and 09 QSK, right? You got to go
service.
Go back in service and handle calls.
And I remember we spoke one time about, we don't necessarily have to go into the incident, but being involved in police shootings or responding to police shootings, that adrenaline rush that hits you, right? You get the call for backup, shots fired. In Miami-Dade County, it's 30, and shots fired, 30, 14 shots fired. And then you cue in and you hone in on where you're responding, the details that are coming in the radio, and then you get to the scene and you take action, right? You talk about setting up a box, a perimeter, and doing what needs to be done at that point, commanding, controlling the scene, but very seldom talk about afterward. And those of us who like coffee, we'll go to the little coffee stand, we'll get a little shot of coffee, we'll talk BS, we'll talk our crap, but then we go back into service. We're a little bit older now, so we can reflect and tell me about how that impacted you, bro. Because I know that you've been involved in a lot of stuff.
So I was one of those cops that I always wanted to arrive first. I was a door kicker. And I love...
Never outgrow that rookie fever, right?
No, man, no. And I still get the adrenaline rush. Even today, when I'll see units running lights and sirens or running a 3, it'll pique my interest if I see, or I'm drinking coffee with some of my guys and I hear the radio and I hear a hot call, robbery in progress or whatever, I want to go. But now as an elected official, I really have no business being there. I'll respond after the fact, as a constituent services, but there's a huge difference as the trajectory of my career advanced. As a silver badge, responding to a hot call, responding to a shooting. I'll give you a scenario. This is many years ago. It was a very strange scene. So it was a woman who was run over by a vehicle, hit and run, and she was on Warren Island Flyover. And we responded to the scene, and she had been run over twice. Witnesses says the vehicle ran her over and then ran over again, and then took off. And then so we're
a little bit of anger there.
Yeah, so we're securing the scene. Obviously, it's a crime of passion, and she's inside a fire rescue. It was Fire Rescue 29. Officers are working that scene. Well, the subject came onto the scene, went into the fire rescue bus, took out a firearm, and now fire rescue personnel are jumping out of the bus. And he had told her, this is many years ago, it was 20-some years ago, something to the effect of, "You'll never forget this moment," and he shot himself. So she's witnessing her husband kill himself, and now there's a hole at the top of fire rescue. Well, that hole was plugged up, but we can still tell that there was a hole there. That incident messes with you. There's another incident inside the trailer park, a guy who was cranking shotgun rounds. And at the time, we go in and, an active shooting in progress. And back then, it wasn't considered an active shooter unless there were multiple victims, we didn't know. And we hear the rounds cranking. So we go into the trailer and we see a guy sitting on the bed, and he's got the shotgun pointed at under his chin. And we're guns drawn, and the guy looks and he says, "Don't worry, you won't have to do any paperwork." And he cranks it.
How does it impact you, bro? You have kids.
Yes.
You have your wife, family. Most of us don't talk about this, right? We go home, we spare our family of the gory details. We may talk a little bit about it, but we talk amongst ourselves. And I always say that we're doing a disservice to our family and not sharing with them. We don't have to share all the gory details, but we think we're sparing them, and maybe we're creating chaos because they don't understand. They know something's wrong with us. They don't know exactly why we're going through whatever we're going through at the moment. Mood swings, maybe irritable, whatever. We're drinking more, doing things that are far more risky than we normally do. Let's give the viewers, for anybody that hasn't experienced that, what goes on in your head? How do you work yourself through these situations?
So later on in life, I've been able to assimilate, and I realized, and what I'm about to say may be very controversial, police officers, firefighters, and military personnel are considered expendable members of society because we respond to the chaos. We put ourselves in harm's way. We are there running to the danger while everyone is running away from it. And we're adrenaline junkies, and we do it willingly. But as every single call occurs, there's another layer, there's another onion, there's another layer, and it gets to a point where we become fatigued, some more than others. There's something that nobody ever talks about in law enforcement. Law enforcement, we're number one. We're number one in alcoholism. We're number one in drug abuse. We're number one in heart disease. We're number one in suicide. Yeah. We're number one. And the reason for that is because you can only respond to the ugliest side of man for so long until the human mind becomes fatigued. Nobody's ever called the police to say, "My daughter just graduated from kindergarten. We're cutting a cake. Why don't you call all your friends and the firefighters? And you know what? We got cupcakes and donuts for you guys." It's never a nice call You never get a call for service that is a nice call. And if you do, it's rare. It's always associated with negative. So this is why there are scenarios where so many law enforcement officers are committing suicide. And I'll give you
epidemic, brother.
I'll give you a situation that happened many years ago, and you probably haven't thought about this for years, but there was a City of Miami lieutenant who was a helicopter pilot who was accused of something. He was wrongfully accused, and this man had so much honor, so much integrity, that when finally they cleared his name, he killed himself because he couldn't stand with the shame of even being accused, even though he was innocent. The stresses of the job, it's not the bad guys. We can deal with the bad guys. A lot of times it's the administration that gives you stress and doesn't back you up. And we are macho men, so we never talk amongst ourselves, most certainly. And we never talk amongst ourselves. But it's funny how, and there's a difference between male and female, but when you put a woman in uniform, I can talk to that female cop. And I can tell her when I'm having those moments of fatigue. And I can tell her when my mind's not right. But I can't tell my wife. Or I can't tell another woman, or I can't tell somebody, a female in my family, because they don't understand that's my sister.
How could they understand?
They can't. So the trauma responses that we deal with throughout our career, their individuals respond to it differently. I have always said that I'm a functioning crazy, and you got to be a crazy individual to run towards gunfire. Or you got to be a crazy individual to say in the beginning of your career, I can't wait to get into a shooting. And then it happens, and then you get the shakes. Or right after an adrenaline rush, or right after fighting with somebody for your gun, or having a subject take your firearm out of your holster, and you engage in some sort of deadly force, and you get the shakes. There are moments where, I'm sure it happens to you, I've woken up my wife has actually woken me up, where I'm grabbing her, or I'm striking her, or I've got her in a lock because I'm having some sort of nightmare and she's the subject. And when I wake up, I apologize completely. There are scenarios where there are nights where I can't go to sleep. I work midnights for a long time, and sometimes at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm up. I deal best in silence. And I'll give you a perfect example. Most police officers can't stand Disney World because of the crowds. I don't like going to the mall. There's too many variables. There's too many potential threats. We've spoken about where you sit at a restaurant or how you park, the whole 9 yards, but I'm always operationally ready. I'm always operationally ready to deal with whatever it is. And this is funny. It's such a police thing. My 8-year-old daughter at the time was 4 years old, and she fell down and she cut her chin. The entire family's there and they're all freaking out. And I kind of got there and I'm like, everybody calm down. Come here. It's going to be fine. Open your eyes. Are you breathing? Everything's good. Just a little blood. All right, let's get in the hospital. And I started commanding a scene like we've always done. Like we command a scene to set up a box or set up an command and control. And we're subhuman. We're not human at that point because it becomes a template. Do we have trauma responses? Yes. Do I drink? Like a fish. I smoke cigarettes. I curse. Sometimes I find myself treating my children like subjects. Or I'll talk to them like if I'm a drill instructor and I'll go like this. What are you doing? And my wife will be like, hey, calm down. So yeah, man, the job definitely takes a toll.
And obviously, for me, not obviously, but for many, silence is our enemy, right? It's when things are quiet. Our head starts working, right? Our minds start running through these scenarios, repeating the incidents. That's when we have our incidents. Now, you mentioned about sleeping and striking your wife or going back into a scene. I'm not talking about domestic violence. That's not what we're talking about here. Fighting in your sleep, if you will, and the person next to you gets hit.
Yeah, night terrors.
My last episode with a PTSD was an episode that I had where I was sleeping. Somebody was knocking at the door rather aggressively. We're family travels and tribes, and one of the family members came in late. They got to the house late. I was already sleeping. Heard the knocking, the banging on the door. They were all happy, partying. Hey, we're gonna ready party long weekend, whatever. How do I react? I thought that it was in the middle of a incident where I was being threatened by somebody that was coming after me.
Mm-hmm.
I go to grab my gun. I get up, and my wife catches me. and she calms me down, brings me back down to the moment, brings me back to reality. But had she not, I think things would have gotten very ugly. But anyway, so point being is that you have these moments of PTSD, if you will. And I'm glad you're sharing what you're sharing, because I want to get to the second part of your career now, or your next phase of your career, which is, you went into elected office, right? You ran for office, you got elected. I'd like to hear why you ran for office, but more importantly, I'd also want to hear, and I want you to emphasize on how you're using your experience to help those that are serving your city.
I ran for office out of frustration, pure frustration, because we talk about command and control, and I am all about honor and integrity and code and ethics. And it's not just words that are on the side of a police car. I love to live my life like a gentleman. We have that warrior mentality where we all have PTSD. I can't leave my house without my gun. I can't. Well, I won't go anywhere. I won't go to the gym. I'll go to the park. It's the first thing I grab. And I feel empty without it. Life after police work is very strange because I felt like I lost my identity. And I don't hear people really talk about that. I felt like I lost my identity.
It takes a lot to say what you're saying. So thank you for that.
I felt like I was less of a man. It's interesting. But I got into police work out of pure frustration. It was a time in our department we had just gotten to the level of accreditation where it was done. I was being promoted to the rank of major. I told the chief at the time that I was not going to be promoted. I didn't want to work for the department anymore. I didn't respect the mayor at the time. I didn't like where the department was headed, and I was going to do something about it. So I retired and I ran for office. I ran for office against a 16-year incumbent, and I won. I always made police work my priority. I've never made it a secret. I live by, you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yes.
So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to those who are watching, is a psychological profile, the basic needs that an individual requires to survive. And it's food and shelter. And right after food and shelter is security. As an elected official, I can't provide food and shelter, even though during COVID, that's all we did. That's not the premise, but I can provide security. I can make sure that the financial instrument that we use from ad valorem goes towards our law enforcement budget. I can ensure that we use proactive measures to generate revenue to make sure that we have a safe and secure environment. So that was my premise. And I focused my attention on that. So at one point I made the City of Sweetwater Police Department the highest paid police department in Miami-Dade County. And I did that. I brought forward legislation. I prepared my colleagues on the commission. It was tedious, and we were able to do it. Now, understand, when I was a dispatcher, I was making $6 an hour. When I was a policeman, I was making $24,000 a year. That's $12 an hour.
Those were the good old days.
When we were 22 full-time officers, now we're 87 full-time officers. And I think now the starting salary is something like 70 something, mid-70s. I'm not sure. And by the way, I'm getting ready to pump legislation where I want to include hazard pay. I want to include afternoon and midnight differential. There's a lot of things that I've done. I've gotten new equipment. I've gotten new cars. We're working on some less than lethal stuff now, because from a law enforcement background, I know the needs and the necessities of our officers. I'll give you a perfect example. 40 mics, 40 millimeter guns, using less than lethal, 100 mile an hour projectile, subject with a mental illness, walking the street with a knife. Obviously, you're going to have a bunch of cops with guns around. Yeah. And the taser, even with the new taser, has a lot more distance than when you and I were around when the first taser came out in like 2001, 2002. It was like a 25-foot gap. Well, the 40 mics, the 40 millimeters, is a 100 mile an hour projectile where you can crank a less than lethal round at a subject, incapacitate them, tase them, and now we don't have to shoot a person with a mental illness. These are things that I'm working on. I'm working on getting patrol shields. I'm working on getting barriers. I'm working on getting Bearcats. I'm working on getting ballistic helmets.
And for those of you that are not in law enforcement that are watching, the benefit of all these tools, if you will, is so that you don't have to, law enforcement does not have to kill a subject unnecessarily, right? So that law enforcement can better operate better serve you, the community, and ensure your safety. I want to go to something because you mentioned that you were pushing, or you brought in implemented some mental health awareness,
Yes,
preventive and responsive measures for the agency and the people that work in your agency. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So it's been around for a few years where in other larger agencies, in Miami-Dade County, there are 34 municipalities. I think we're probably the only municipality our size in the state of Florida who has a mental health professional who's providing peer support. This person is a retired 32-year veteran. He was a high-speed, low-drag guy.
The guy from the city of Miami, right?
And he's received not only sufficient training, but he's got a master's degree in mental health, and he'll sit down and any kind of trauma response, periodically he'll speak to our personnel, whether it's a hot call. And I'll give you a perfect example. You remember the FIU bridge collapse?
Of course.
Well, we had officers respond to that call. I responded to that as an elected official, and now my officers are under a bridge dragging people out. Well, we actually had an officer who said that they had a PTSD event because of that. Now, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know. But there really isn't a whole lot of mechanisms in place. So currently I'm working on some sort of legislation here in the city of Sweetwater that I'm going to be urging with the governor to figure out some sort of PTSD mechanism for law enforcement, because we do go out 2/3 medical. Mm-hmm. You get injured on the job and your knee, you lose a finger, whatever it is, you go out 2/3 medical. But there really isn't a whole lot right now of PTSD. I know there's some sort of legislation that's trying, there's something out there, but it's not where it needs to be. And we spoke about this before. When you get into law enforcement, there's a psychological examination, then you never take a psych again. Yeah. Unless you go into a specialized unit, they might polygraph you, but they never take another psych. And the funny thing is the psychological examination, when you break it down, it's called the MMPI. If you and I were to take a psychological examination now, the doctor would call the hospital and say, put these people in a straitjacket. Now, if you live with mommy and daddy and you have no life experience, you can. But what about if you're a combat veteran and you're applying to be a police officer? And as a combat veteran, the things that you've seen in combat, you're not going to be looked at the same. So people come into law enforcement already with certain trauma responses, whatever has happened, whether they were beat as a child or they grew up without a father or mother or whatever it is. And then come the ugliest side of man calls. And it's call after call after call, and it just piles on and piles on. And if you could just imagine, every call is like, an ounce of weight that's on your shoulders, and every call is another ounce. But by the time there's a certain point in your career where you're talking about, 500-pound elephant. Well, not an elephant weighing 500 pounds, but obviously, there's this huge weight on your shoulders, and people become fatigued. So I've always spoken about outlets. I love to play golf. You always make fun of me. I love to play golf 3 times a week. I get to be violent with a ball. Here's another thing we never discussed, Robert. Have you ever identified that we are trained to be violent? Have you ever vocalized it?
Yes.
So we are trained to be violent with discipline, like a martial artist. We are trained to respond and react to the ugliest side of man, and once it's done, so you're going to go on a high-speed chase with a subject shooting at you, then you go and you grab the subject, and all of a sudden you got to go nice and easy and put them in cuffs.
And that's where we fail, right? That's where we're deficient in training on how to deal with after the violence is, because in law enforcement, there's a need at times.
Well, even after, during, just at the end of a chase. Yes. Remember what used to happen at the end of a chase before social media and all that. Now you got Channel 7 News and you got media and you got Instagram and everybody's with a cell phone. And after this chaos where the subject's been shooting at you, threatening your life, and he's cut you off and he's rammed your vehicle, you got to now place that subject into custody, and you got to sit there and where do you throw all that energy? Where do you throw all that
maybe
chaos?
And try to save the person's life.
Sure, it goes internally. And it stays there and it festers. So there are a lot of guys now, they get into jiu-jitsu and they have outlets. The reality is that we're not doing enough. And you and I are, I think, one of 8 people in the history of Miami-Dade County that made the jump from law enforcement to being an elected official. I think it's 8. I could be wrong. Yeah. So there's not many of us. Some better than others, some more effective and efficient than others. And the reality is that we should be doing more. Unfortunately, you and I have suffered from the bureaucracy of government, so there's only so much we can do because we're one person that has to present a vote and if the political environment is not conducive. Now, what I will tell you is this. I'm blessed because in the city of Sweetwater, I don't know about all the other municipalities. I can only tell you what I see on the news and what I see in Inside Baseball. We have no political drama. We have no political turmoil. And the city of Sweetwater is growing. What we're doing in the city of Sweetwater today, I'm extremely proud of our Chief Sergio Diaz, our Deputy Chief, our Assistant Chief, Frank Fernandez, a.k.a. Scooby, who's been on your program, who was my TA in the academy. Really cool to be able to hire your former training advisor, who has more than 15,000 SWAT missions. We'll talk about trauma responses. So talk about somebody who suffers from PTSD. I mean, I'm a 10th. I've gone through a 10th of what that man has gone through. But I will tell you with great certainty, we are functioning crazies. Some of us function better than others. But you got to be a little crazy to do this job sometimes.
For sure. And on that note, we've reached the end of our show, but I think that leaves us open for next conversation, if you're willing to come out.
Oh, absolutely, right? Man.
So I've been speaking with the president of the city council for the city of Sweetwater in Florida, Marcos Villanueva, a friend, a colleague, retired police officer, and a brother, yes, for sure. To Rachel Brummage, our producer behind the scenes, we can't thank you enough. The Miller brothers, Grant, Michael Miller, the Miami's Community News team, and you, the audience. Again, we express our gratitude. Look forward to speaking with you next time. You can find us on all major podcast platforms, Spotify, YouTube, Apple, Amazon, iHeart, and of course our @betsandbadges.com website. Thank you. Look forward to speaking with you again next time.